Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank each of you for being part of this incredible journey. If you're enjoying these stories of empowerment and justice, consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps us build this amazing community. Let's dive in. I think we should move the wedding up, Daniel suggested casually over breakfast, reaching for the artisanal coffee I'd brewed. Maybe this spring instead of waiting until fall? I glanced up from the real estate listings I'd been reviewing, momentarily surprised. That's sudden. Any particular reason? Daniel flashed that perfect smile that had first caught my attention 3 years ago at my best friend's gallery opening. I just can't wait to start our life together, Eliza. Besides, that vineyard you love in Sonoma might still have a spring opening. I studied my fiancé's face as he scrolled through his phone. Investment banker Daniel Mercer, impeccably dressed, even on Saturday mornings, his dark hair precisely cut, his Ivy League confidence never wavering. The man I'd agreed to marry after a whirlwind 18-month romance. I'll think about it, I replied, returning to my laptop screen. As a real estate attorney specializing in historic properties, spring was my busiest season. The Henderson estate closing is in April, and I've got the Westbrook Mansion litigation right after. Daniel nodded absently, his attention on his phone. Of course, just an idea. What he didn't know was that I'd already uncovered his urgent reason for wanting to accelerate our wedding timeline. The previous night, while he'd been at his client dinner, I'd discovered irregularities in my bank notifications. Small test. Transactions from unfamiliar accounts, the kind that precede larger transfers. I'm meeting Caroline for lunch, I said, closing my laptop. Wedding venue scouting, supposedly, though I suspect it's an excuse for champagne on a Saturday. Perfect, Daniel replied, suddenly attentive. I've got some work calls anyway. Investment opportunities don't recognize weekends. He kissed my forehead. Give Caroline my best. I maintained my practice smile, the same one I'd perfected through years of high-stakes negotiations with developers who thought they could outmaneuver a woman in real estate law. Will do. Instead of meeting Caroline, I drove to my childhood home, a Victorian masterpiece in Presidio Heights that my grandmother had left me. The property that had sparked my love for historic real estate, the home I'd meticulously restored room by room after law school. I parked a block away, watching as an unfamiliar couple exited my house with a woman I recognized as Vanessa Reynolds, one of the city's top luxury real estate agents. The woman gestured enthusiastically at the stained glass windows I'd had restored by an artisan from Prague. My stomach tightened as I snapped photos with my phone's telephoto lens. This was the third showing this week, according to my hidden security system, the one Daniel knew nothing about. My phone buzzed with a text from my investigator, Michael. Records confirmed. Transfer of deed filed yesterday. Signature verification in progress. My hands trembled slightly as I started the car. Somehow, Daniel had managed to sell my family home, or at least was in the process of selling it. The property that wasn't, even in his name. The home that wasn't part of our prenuptial agreement discussions. Driving toward downtown, I called the one person I could trust implicitly. Judge Eleanor Montgomery's office, answered a crisp voice. Rebecca, it's Eliza Parker. Is my godmother available? Minutes later, I sat in Eleanor's private chambers, the distinguished judge listening intently as I laid out what I'd discovered. Forgery, Eleanor stated flatly, examining the documentation I'd brought. And sophisticated identity theft. Daniel would need access to your personal documents, digital signatures, notary connections. All of which he has, I replied quietly. I trusted him completely. Eleanor's eyes, sharp after 40 years on the bench, studied my face. What do you need from me, Eliza? Time, I answered, and discretion. I need to understand how deep this goes before I confront him. As I left the courthouse, another text from Michael appeared. Offshore account identified. Transfers dating back 8 months, more properties involved, meeting at 4 p.m. to review findings. I took a deep breath, slipping my phone into my purse as I prepared to return home to Daniel. The weight of my engagement ring suddenly felt suffocating against my finger. 3 years of building a life with someone, only to discover it had all been an elaborate con. In my car, I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, composing my features into a mask of blissful ignorance. I would play the unsuspecting fiancé for a little longer, just long enough to uncover the full extent of Daniel's betrayal and ensure he never saw the retribution coming. After all, he might be an investment banker with wealthy connections, but I was Eliza Parker, the granddaughter of Judge William Parker and protégé of Judge Eleanor Montgomery. I'd spent my career untangling complex property fraud and protecting historic legacies. Daniel had no idea who he was really dealing with, but he was about to find out. I arrived at Michael's office precisely at 4, having texted Daniel that my lunch with Caroline had turned into an impromptu bridal shopping expedition. His reply had been immediate. Perfect timing. Working late tonight. Don't wait up for dinner. Michael Chen had been my investigator on numerous real estate fraud cases. A former digital forensics expert for the FBI, he now worked exclusively for a select clientele, mostly law firms and high-net-worth individuals concerned about privacy breaches. The identity theft is sophisticated, Michael began without preamble, his office deliberately Spartan except for 6 monitors displaying various data streams. Daniel created digital duplicates of your signature starting approximately 10 months ago, beginning with minor documents. My throat tightened. 10 months ago, right after I'd introduced Daniel to my family at Christmas, right after he'd proposed with the vintage emerald ring that had supposedly belonged to his grandmother. "Show me everything," I instructed, setting my purse aside and taking the seat beside him. For the next 2 hours, Michael methodically revealed Daniel's elaborate scheme. Multiple shell companies created in Delaware and Nevada. A sophisticated network of transactions moving money through increasingly obscure channels. Falsified powers of attorney. And most disturbingly, a pattern of similar activities stretching back years before I'd even met him. "He's done this before," I said quietly, staring at the evidence of at least 2 previous long-term relationships that had ended with significant property transfers. Michael nodded grimly. Ellen Whitaker in Boston, Rebecca Chambers in Chicago, both successful professionals with significant real estate holdings or inheritances. Both relationships lasted approximately 2 years before major assets were liquidated. "And both women?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. Whitaker suffered a complete professional breakdown, resigned from her partnership at her architecture firm, later filed for bankruptcy. Chambers fought back legally, but the documentation was seemingly ironclad. She lost everything in legal fees before eventually settling. I scrolled through the financial trails, recognizing the sophisticated layering that kept Daniel's name officially disconnected from the transactions while ensuring he ultimately controlled the proceeds. What about the offshore accounts? Michael pulled up another screen. Cayman Islands initially, then Singapore. Currently, he's routing most funds through a complex structure in Liechtenstein. We've identified approximately $14.2 million in holdings. My mind reeled. The Victorian was worth nearly $5 million after my renovations. Where had the other $9 million come from? "There's more," Michael continued. "He's been systematically accessing your client files. Most recently, the Henderson Estate and Westbrook Mansion, both properties with 8-figure valuations. The same properties I'd mentioned at breakfast. The timing of Daniel's wedding acceleration suddenly made perfect sense. He needed to secure marital access to my professional dealings before I discovered the theft of my home. The Henderson closing is in 3 weeks, I murmured. The Westbrook litigation settlement likely by end of summer. Combined liquidity of approximately $35 million. I rose and paced the office, my legal mind automatically cataloging statutes violated, potential charges, jurisdictional complexities. But beneath the professional analysis, a cold fury was building. "There's something else you should see," Michael said quietly, pulling up surveillance footage. "This is from your house yesterday afternoon." The video showed Daniel giving a personal tour to Vanessa Reynolds and an older man I didn't recognize. Daniel moved through my grandmother's home with proprietary confidence, pointing out original features, discussing renovation potential as if he'd personally overseen the restorations I'd spent years completing. "Who's the man?" I asked, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. "Julian Hargrove, real estate developer known for gutting historic properties and building luxury condominiums." The final piece clicked into place. Daniel wasn't just stealing my house, he was planning to destroy it. "I need copies of everything," I said, returning to my seat. "And I need to know who else is involved." Daniel couldn't have managed all the legal documentation himself, even with digital forgeries. Michael pulled up another file. "We've identified a paralegal at Brennan & White who processed most of the paperwork. Timothy Reynolds. Vanessa Reynolds' husband," I realized. "They're working together." Just then, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel, closing in on big deal, staying at the office tonight. Love you. I stared at the message, a plan already forming. Daniel had given me the perfect opportunity. "I need immediate access to our condo," I told Michael. "Tonight." Michael raised an eyebrow. "You're not confronting him yet?" "No," I replied, gathering my notes. "First, I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. And I need to secure what's mine before he realizes I know." As I prepared to leave, Michael asked the question that had been hanging between us. "What's your end game here, Eliza? Criminal charges? Civil suit?" I paused at the door, thinking of the two women whose lives Daniel had previously destroyed, of my grandmother's carefully preserved home, now destined for demolition, of the trust I'd placed in the man I'd agreed to marry. "Justice," I answered simply. "Complete and inescapable justice." Outside, twilight had fallen over the city. I checked my appearance in my car's mirror, ensuring no trace of my discoveries showed on my face. For the next few days, I would need to maintain the illusion of the unsuspecting fiancé while I executed the first phase of my counterattack. After all, Daniel wasn't just committing fraud against me. He was attempting it against two of the wealthiest estates in the city, both under my professional care. He had no idea that in targeting me, he'd chosen an adversary uniquely positioned to destroy him. The security panel in our high-rise condominium beeped softly as I entered. The space dark except for the ambient city lights filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows. I moved silently through our shared home, now seeing it through entirely new eyes, no longer as our space, but as Daniel's staged backdrop. I headed directly to his home office, the one room he'd insisted remain his private domain. "Investment. Privacy," he'd explained when we moved in together. I'd respected that boundary, until now. The office door featured a biometric lock, but I'd prepared for this. From my purse, I extracted a silicone cast of Daniel's right thumbprint, created from a wine glass he'd used at dinner last week, back when I'd first noticed the suspicious bank notifications and had begun taking precautions. The lock clicked. Open. Inside, the minimalist space reflected Daniel's carefully curated image. Expensive yet understated furniture, abstract art selected by the designer he'd hired, credentials displayed just prominently enough to impress without seeming ostentatious. Went straight to his desk, powering on his secondary laptop, the one he believed I didn't know existed. The password prompt appeared, but Michael had already provided me with the keystroke capture data from the spyware he'd installed remotely yesterday. While the computer booted up, I methodically photographed the contents of his desk drawers, filing, cabinet, and safe, combination acquired months ago when Daniel mumbled it in his sleep. Everything appeared meticulously organized, almost too perfect, like his entire persona. The laptop yielded immediate results. Unlike his primary computer, this one contained the real records of his operation. Spreadsheets tracking assets targeted, timeline projections, communications with accomplices. I connected an encrypted drive and began copying everything. A folder, labeled Parker Properties, contained detailed files not just on my Victorian home, but on several other family properties I'd inherited. Smaller investments my parents had purchased before their accident. Properties I rarely discussed that weren't publicly connected to me. "How did you know about these?" I whispered, scrolling through detailed valuation assessments. The answer appeared in another folder. EP communications. My emails, text messages, phone logs, all meticulously archived and annotated. He'd been monitoring me from the beginning, harvesting every casual mention of family assets, every professional connection, every potential resource. My hands trembled slightly, but I continued, methodically documenting everything I found. In a hidden partition, I discovered the template documents used for creating falsified powers of attorney, property transfers, and financial authorizations, complete with progressively refined versions of my digital signature. In his physical safe, behind investment statements and insurance policies, I found a USB drive containing what appeared to be his contingency plans, exit strategies, identity documents, and overseas contact information. Most disturbing were files on his previous targets, Rebecca and Ellen, containing intimate photographs, personal journals, and psychological assessments. He hadn't just stolen their assets, he'd studied them, learned their vulnerabilities, customized his approach to each woman. My phone vibrated with a text from Michael. "Reynolds meeting Hargrove tomorrow morning. Demolition permits already being prepared." They were moving quickly. Too quickly. Another text followed. "Daniel's primary phone GPS shows movement. Heading toward condo." I froze, checking the timestamp. Daniel was supposed to be working all night. Why was he returning early? Working swiftly, I completed the data transfer, carefully returned everything to its precise position, and exited the office. The biometric lock re-engaged with a soft click. I hurried to the master bathroom, turning on the shower and stripping off my clothes just as I heard the front door unlock. Stepping under the hot water, I forced my breathing to normalize, my mind racing to process what I'd discovered while preparing to play my role. "Eliza?" Daniel called, his voice echoing through the apartment. "In the shower," I replied, injecting just the right amount of surprise in my tone. "I thought you were working late." The bathroom door opened, releasing steam as Daniel's silhouette appeared. "Deal wrapped up earlier than expected," he explained, loosening his tie. "Thought I'd surprise you." I smiled through the glass shower door, wondering if he'd returned because something had triggered his suspicion. "Lucky me. How was your day?" Daniel leaned against the vanity, sharing carefully constructed details about his fictional deal while I rinsed shampoo from my hair, maintaining the performance of normalcy. Behind my attentive expression, I was cataloging the evidence I'd discovered, formulating next steps, identifying the legal vulnerabilities in his scheme. "You seem distracted," he observed as I stepped out of the shower, wrapping myself in a plush towel. "Everything okay with Caroline and the wedding planning?" I manufactured a small sigh. "Just work stress. The Henderson estate is more complicated than expected. I may need to push back on that spring wedding idea, make it summer. Instead," something flickered in his eyes. "Calculation, recalibration. Whatever works best for you, babe. No rush." Liar. Every move was calculated, every timeline precisely engineered for maximum extraction before discovery. That night, as Daniel slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, mentally revising my counterattack. I needed to move faster than anticipated, but couldn't risk alerting him. Tomorrow, I would implement the first phase of my response while continuing to play the unsuspecting fiancé. Daniel Mercer had spent years perfecting his predatory operation, but he'd made one catastrophic miscalculation. He'd chosen a victim whose professional life had been built on understanding property fraud, whose family connections permeated the legal system, and whose determination now bordered on ruthless. As I finally drifted toward sleep, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity. When this was over, Daniel wouldn't just lose his ill-gotten gains, he would lose everything. Morning arrived with Daniel already gone, a note on his pillow explaining he had an early client breakfast. I knew exactly which client he was meeting, Julian Hargrove, the developer planning to demolish my family home. I dressed carefully in one of my most imposing courtroom suits, a charcoal Armani with subtle pinstripes, and headed not to my office but to Brennan and White, one of the city's most prestigious law firms. "Ms. Parker," greeted Margaret Brennan herself, rising from behind her desk as I was shown into her corner office overlooking the bay. "This is unexpected." "I apologize for the short notice," I replied, setting my briefcase on the polished conference table. "But this matter requires immediate attention and absolute discretion." Margaret gestured to the leather chairs. At 67, she remained one of the sharpest legal minds in California, her silver hair cut in a severe bob that complemented her reputation for ruthless precision. "I understand you've recently processed several property transfers through your paralegal, Timothy Reynolds," I began, removing a folder from my briefcase. Margaret's expression didn't change, but her posture stiffened slightly. "Timothy handles numerous transactions. Which ones specifically interest you?" I slid the documentation across the table. "The fraudulent ones involving my properties, falsified using my forged signature." For 10 minutes, I methodically presented the evidence Michael had compiled, explaining the elaborate scheme orchestrated by Daniel, facilitated by Timothy Reynolds, and executed through Reynolds' wife, Vanessa. "If accurate, this represents a significant liability for our firm," Margaret noted, her tone measured as she examined the documents. "It's worse than that," I replied, producing another file. "Reynolds has been involved in similar falsifications for at least 3 other major clients, all vulnerable to Daniel's specific targeting criteria: successful professional women with Chi, significant real estate holdings, minimal family connections, and high-value client portfolios." Margaret's eyes narrowed. A woman who had built her reputation in the male-dominated legal world of the 1980s, she understood precisely what I was describing. "Reynolds was hired on recommendation from Bradley Wilson," I continued, referencing one of the firm's senior partners. "I believe Wilson may be receiving kickbacks for providing legal cover to these operations." "That's a serious accusation against my partner, Ms. Parker." "One I can substantiate," I countered, producing financial records showing irregular payments to offshore accounts connected to Wilson. "The question isn't whether this happened, Margaret. The question is how you'll respond now that you know." Margaret Brennan hadn't become one of the most powerful attorneys in San Francisco by being easily intimidated. She studied me carefully before responding. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A coordinated response that protects your firm's reputation while ensuring justice is served," I explained. "I need access to all documentation processed by Reynolds, Wilson's complete client list for the past 5 years, and your firm's cooperation with a discreet investigation led by Judge Montgomery." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Eleanor Montgomery? The federal judge?" "My godmother," I confirmed, "who is particularly interested in white-collar crime targeting professional women." For several minutes, Margaret considered her options. I waited patiently, knowing she was calculating potential damage to her firm against the benefits of alliance with a federal judge. "What happens to Daniel Mercer in this scenario?" she finally asked. "Justice," I replied simply. "Complete and proportionate." Margaret nodded once. Decision made. Reynolds will be suspended pending investigation as of this afternoon. You'll have everything by close of business today. And Wilson will be handled appropriately once we've secured all evidence. I finished for her. As I prepared to leave, Margaret asked the question I'd been expecting. Why come to me directly? You could have gone straight to the authorities. I turned at the door. Because 30 years ago, when my mother was starting her career, you mentored her. Because you understand what it means to build something meaningful, only to have men attempt to take it from you. And because I need allies who recognize this isn't just about property theft, it's about predators who systematically target successful women. Margaret's expression softened fractionally. Your mother would be proud of your approach, Eliza. Methodical, thorough, and giving your opponent just enough rope. From Brennan and White, I went directly to my next strategic alliance, Diane Hargrove, Julian's estranged wife and a prominent conservationist who had spent decades fighting against developers like her husband. We met in a private room at the women's club where her grandmother and mine had both been founding members. Julian's involved. In another historic demolition? Diane confirmed, her expression hardening as I outlined what I'd discovered. That vindictive bastard knows exactly how much I care about preservation. He's meeting with Daniel this morning, I explained. They're accelerating the timeline. Diane pulled out her phone. My attorney handles the family foundation that still controls 30% of Julian's company. Consider demolition permits blocked indefinitely. By noon, I had secured commitments from Margaret Brennan, Diane Hargrove, and 3 other strategically positioned allies, each with personal reasons to support my cause, each with resources crucial to my plan. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. GPS tracker shows Daniel heading to the Victorian again. Meeting with Hargrove just ended abruptly. Something had changed. I needed to move faster. I parked 3 blocks from my Victorian, using the service entrance of a neighboring property owned by an old family friend. Through their garden, I accessed the hidden pathway that connected to my backyard. A remnant from Prohibition days when these mansions shared secret access routes. From dense shrubbery, I watched Daniel pacing my back terrace, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing emphatically. Even without hearing his words, his agitation was evident. Something had disrupted his carefully orchestrated plan. My phone vibrated with an encrypted message from Margaret Brennan. Reynolds suspended. Electronic access revoked. Security escorting him out now. Wilson being monitored. That explained Daniel's distress. His legal facilitator had just lost access, likely triggering internal security protocols at Brennan and White. The timeline had accelerated beyond his control. Daniel disappeared inside my house, and I used the opportunity to slip into the garden shed where I'd installed a secondary surveillance hub years ago. The monitors flickered to life, showing Daniel frantically searching through my grandmother's antique desk, rifling through drawers he had no right to touch. I activated the audio feed. Don't care what it takes, Daniel was saying into his phone. If Reynolds doesn't have access, find someone else who does. We need those documents finalized before she... The door chime interrupted him. On the monitor, I watched Julian Hargrove enter without waiting for an invitation, his expression thunderous. The permits are blocked, Hargrove announced without preamble. Every single one. Daniel froze. That's impossible. Your contact guaranteed. My wife, Hargrove cut in, has apparently taken sudden interest in this property's historical significance. The Preservation Board received an emergency petition this morning with 300 signatures, including from the mayor's wife. Daniel's carefully controlled facade cracked momentarily, revealing the calculating predator beneath. This is a temporary setback. We can refile under... My investors are already nervous about the accelerated timeline, Hargrove interrupted again. Now with permit delays and Diane involved, they're threatening to pull out entirely. They can't back out now. The transfer is already... Is it? Hargrove challenged. Because my sources at the county records office say there's an authentication. Hold on, all recently filed deeds connected to a paralegal named Reynolds. I watched Daniel's face pale slightly before he forced a confident smile. Minor clerical issue. It'll be resolved by tomorrow. It better be, Hargrove warned. I've already committed significant capital based on your guarantees. After Hargrove left, Daniel made 3 more increasingly desperate calls. To his contact at the county records office, to Vanessa Reynolds, and finally to someone he referred to only as the cleaner. This last conversation used coded language about removing complications and ensuring complete transfer that sent a chill through me. I needed to accelerate my own plans. Daniel was growing desperate, and desperate predators were unpredictable. I slipped out the way I'd come, driving directly to the secure office where Eleanor Montgomery was coordinating our legal response. Daniel's panicking, I reported, showing Eleanor and Michael the surveillance footage. He mentioned a cleaner who handles complications. Eleanor's expression darkened. This matches patterns from his previous operations. When Ellen Whitaker fought back, her home suffered a suspicious fire that destroyed her documentation. When Rebecca Chambers refused to vacate her Chicago property, she experienced a break-in where only her legal papers were taken. We need to secure everything, I decided. Not just documentation, but all my assets, client files, everything connected to the Henderson and Westbrook estates. For the next hour, we executed an emergency protocol, digital files transferred. To secure servers, physical documents moved to Judge Montgomery's chambers. Emergency filings prepared to freeze all transactions connected to my properties. What about personal safety? Michael asked quietly, after Eleanor stepped out to make calls. I considered his question seriously. Install additional security at my condo, and I need a secure way to gather final evidence without alerting Daniel. Michael handed me a small case. Upgraded surveillance. These look like regular jewelry but capture everything. Audio, video, geolocation. Inside were diamond earrings, a watch, and a pendant, all containing sophisticated recording technology. The watch is particularly important, Michael explained. It has a panic button feature. Press 3 times if you're in danger. I checked my phone as another message arrived. This one from Diane Hargrove. Julian is furious, threatening to contact alternate buyers. Mentioned investment group from overseas. Daniel was scrambling to salvage his operation, reaching out to backup resources. I needed to discover who these connections were before they emerged as unexpected threats. We need complete surveillance on Hargrove, I told Michael. If Daniel approaches new buyers, we need to know who they are. As I prepared to leave, Eleanor returned, her expression grave. The forensic accountant found something disturbing, she said, placing a folder on the table. The money trail from Daniel's previous victims doesn't end with offshore accounts. It continues to a network of shell companies connected to organized crime operations. Daniel isn't just a con man, he's potentially laundering money for something much bigger. I absorbed this information, recalibrating my understanding of exactly who I was dealing with. This wasn't just about my house or even Daniel's pattern of targeting successful women. This was potentially part of a sophisticated criminal enterprise. Does this change our approach? I asked Eleanor. It means we proceed even more carefully, she replied. But it also means when we move against him, we'll have federal resources available. I nodded, standing to leave. Then we continue as planned. Tonight, I need to maintain the illusion that nothing has changed. Tonight, I would return home to Daniel, pretend I knew nothing of his scheme, and extract whatever information I could about his contacts, his backup plans, and most importantly, this mysterious cleaner. I returned to our condo at precisely 7:15, the time I typically arrived home on Tuesdays. Everything about my entrance needed to appear routine, from the sound of my keys in the door to the slight sigh as I set down my briefcase. Daniel was waiting with an opened bottle of my favorite Cabernet. his smile practiced yet strained around the edges. The dining table was elegantly set with the Limoges china we'd purchased in Paris, the trip where he'd first mentioned marriage. "Special occasion?" I asked, accepting the glass he offered. "Just appreciating my beautiful fiancé," he replied, kissing my cheek. "You've been working so hard lately?" The pendant camera captured his expression as he pulled away, calculating, assessing, searching for any sign that I suspected him. I returned his smile with practiced ease, years of high-stakes negotiations making me adept at controlling my micro-expressions. "This is lovely," I said, gesturing to the table, "but unexpected. I thought you were working late again." "Change of plans," Daniel explained, returning to the kitchen where something simmered on the stove. "Market volatility created some unexpected opportunities. I closed a major position this afternoon." Translation: his scheme was imploding, and he needed to accelerate his contingency plans. "Congratulations," I replied, slipping off my jacket, though I admit I'm exhausted. The Henderson estate situation became complicated today. Daniel's stirring paused fractionally. "Complications? Nothing serious, I hope." I shrugged, crafting my answer carefully. "Some questions about deed transfers and property rights. Nothing I can't handle, but the closing might be delayed." The Henderson estate represented potential access to over $20 million in liquid assets, a significant component of what Daniel hoped to control through our marriage. A delay threatened his timeline. "How long a delay?" he asked, his tone casual, while his eyes remained sharp. "Hard to say. Could be a week, could be a month." I sipped my wine. "Actually, it might affect our wedding plans. If this drags on, spring might be impossible." I watched him recalibrate in real time, adjusting his approach based on this new information. His smile remained fixed while his mind clearly raced through contingencies. "Whatever works best," he said finally. "I just want you to be happy." Throughout dinner, I maintained the delicate balance between normalcy and strategic information gathering. Each question I asked was carefully constructed to seem innocent while designed to extract specific details. "How's Vanessa's real estate business?" I inquired midway through the meal. "Didn't you mention she was handling that property in Presidio Heights?" Daniel's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "I think she mentioned something about that. Market's competitive there." I murmured. "My grandmother's Victorian is in that neighborhood. I should have her assess its value sometime, purely out of curiosity." His expression flickered. Concern, calculation, then forced casualness. "Real estate isn't always the best investment. Markets fluctuate." "True," I conceded. "But some properties have sentimental value that transcends market considerations. I could never part with that house. Too many memories." Daniel reached for the wine bottle, refilling my glass perhaps too generously. "Sometimes nostalgia costs us opportunities. Speaking of which, what if we considered a destination wedding? Amalfi Coast, perhaps? We could leave as soon as next week for venue scouting." The sudden shift wasn't subtle. He wanted me out of the country, away from my properties, my clients, my support network. "That sounds wonderful," I lied smoothly. "Though I'd need to sort out the Henderson situation first. Judge Montgomery is overseeing aspects of it personally." The mention of Eleanor's involvement visibly unsettled him. "Montgomery? The federal judge? Why would she be involved in a simple estate matter?" I explained how Eleanor had taken special interest in the case given certain irregularities, watching Daniel's knuckles whiten around his wine glass. Mentioning Eleanor wasn't just strategic, it was warning him that powerful figures were already paying attention. After dinner, as we moved to the living room, Daniel's phone chimed with what appeared to be an urgent message. He glanced at it, his expression darkening momentarily before he excused himself to make a call. In his brief absence, I placed a tiny surveillance device beneath the credenza in his office, the final component needed to complete our monitoring. Grid. When he returned, his manner had subtly shifted from romantic to businesslike. "I hate to do this," he began, "but there's an emerging situation with Asian markets. I need to handle it tonight." I feigned disappointment while inwardly celebrating this unexpected opportunity. "Don't worry about me. I have briefs to review anyway." As soon as Daniel left, I activated all recording devices and messaged Michael. "Target has left premises. Operation Sanctuary is active." Within 20 minutes, a discreet team arrived to create comprehensive documentation of everything in our shared home, photographing documents, cloning devices, cataloging evidence. Meanwhile, I compiled a detailed inventory of my personal possessions, particularly family heirlooms and irreplaceable items. "Daniel's heading to the Occidental Club," Michael reported via secure line. "Meeting someone named Kazarian." The name triggered immediate recognition. Arman Kazarian, rumored connection to international money laundering operations. If Daniel was meeting him directly, the situation had escalated beyond property fraud. As Michael's team completed their work, I made one final call to Eleanor. "We've identified the cleaner," she informed me. "Former military contractor, specializes in document destruction and digital forensics. Currently on a flight to San Francisco, arriving tomorrow morning." Time was running out faster than anticipated. Daniel wasn't just trying to steal my property, he was preparing to eliminate all evidence that might implicate him. "Implement protocol checkmate," I instructed Michael as the team departed. "We move tomorrow." Dawn broke with a text from Daniel. "Early meeting with international clients. See you tonight for dinner. Perfect timing." I dressed quickly in a charcoal suit and pearl earrings containing Michael's most sophisticated recording technology, then headed not to my office but to the private banking division of First Continental Trust. "Ms. Parker," greeted Harrison Wells, the bank's silver-haired executive vice president. "Judge Montgomery mentioned you might be visiting us." Wells ushered me into a private conference room where an array of documents awaited my signature. For the next hour, I executed a series of financial maneuvers designed to protect my assets while creating a convincing illusion for Daniel. "These accounts will appear active but actually function as honeypots," Wells explained, indicating a set of newly created decoys. "Any access attempts will be logged and traced without alerting the intruder." "And the Henderson and Westbrook estate funds?" "Already secured under the judicial protection order Judge Montgomery issued last night. The financial architecture is quite elegant. From the outside, everything appears normal, but any attempt to transfer or access funds triggers immediate security protocols." I signed the final authorization, then asked the crucial question, "What about Daniel's accounts?" Wells slid a folder across the polished table. "As you suspected, he's been moving substantial sums offshore throughout the past week. However, his most recent transfers have encountered unexpected complications." I reviewed the documentation, showing how Daniel's attempts to move millions had been subtly redirected into monitored holding accounts, a sophisticated financial trap Eleanor had helped orchestrate through her federal connections. "He doesn't realize it yet," Wells continued, "but he's effectively locked himself out of approximately $11 million. And Kazarian's involvement?" Wells's expression tightened. "That's where this extends beyond civil fraud. Treasury Department is now monitoring all transactions between Mercer and Kazarian-connected entities. They've identified patterns consistent with international money laundering. This confirmed my suspicions about Daniel's operation extending beyond simple property theft. He wasn't just stealing from women like me. He was potentially part of a sophisticated criminal network." From the bank, I proceeded to the county recorder's office where Madeline Chen, the chief registrar and my former law school classmate, waited with another set of critical documents. "The authentication hold worked perfectly," Madeline explained, spreading property records across her desk. "Daniel's attempt to transfer your Victorian created a digital tripwire. Every property transaction he's touched in the past 3 years is now flagged for review." "What about the current deed status?" Madeline smiled tightly. "Officially, the property remains registered to you. The falsified transfer triggered automatic verification protocols I implemented last year after that real estate fraud case in Oakland. Daniel's paperwork is essentially suspended in bureaucratic limbo, and Hargrove's development plans? Officially on hold pending historical review by the Preservation Board, Madeline confirmed, which, coincidentally, is chaired by Diane Hargrove this quarter. I signed the necessary affidavits confirming the forgery allegations, which would initiate a formal investigation into all parties involved in the fraudulent transfer. By mid-morning, I had secured my financial assets, protected my properties, and initiated formal investigations into Daniel's activities, all without him realizing his carefully constructed scheme was unraveling. My next destination was the offices of Lockhart Security, where Michael had established our operational headquarters. The moment I entered, I knew something had changed. The energy in the room was different, more urgent, more focused. "We've identified the cleaner," Michael announced without preamble. "Jacob Stein, former military intelligence, dishonorable discharge after allegations of evidence tampering in Afghanistan. Currently works as a digital crisis consultant for wealthy clients with problematic situations." Michael displayed Stein's surveillance photos on the main screen, a nondescript man in his 40s with military short hair and calculating eyes. "He landed at SFO 90 minutes ago," Michael continued. "Currently checked into the Mandarin Oriental. Under the name James Smith. He's scheduled to meet Daniel at your Victorian at 2 p.m. This accelerated our timeline considerably. Whatever Daniel planned to clean, it would happen today. "Do we have audio surveillance prepared at the house?" I asked. "Better than that," Michael replied, pulling up a schematic of my Victorian. "We've implemented complete coverage. Audio, video, thermal imaging. If they so much as whisper, we'll capture it." Linda Zhao, the assistant district attorney Eleanor had brought into our confidence, stepped forward with a document bearing an official seal. "Judge Montgomery secured federal authorization for the surveillance," she explained. "Everything we collect will be admissible, provided we maintain proper chain of custody." I reviewed the operational details, noting how Michael had coordinated with law enforcement to ensure our evidence gathering remained legally unassailable while maximizing our strategic advantage. "What about Kazarian?" I asked, turning to the international aspect of Daniel's scheme. Michael pulled up another file, this one marked with federal designations. "Treasury Department has authorized us to share limited information. Kazarian appears to be using Daniel and others like him to convert illegally obtained funds into seemingly legitimate real estate assets, making Daniel not just a con man but potentially an accessory to international money laundering," Linda added, "which significantly increases potential charges and sentencing guidelines." I checked my watch, 11:30 a.m. Daniel would meet his cleaner in less than 3 hours, providing us the final evidence needed to complete our case against him. "Set up the command center at my Victorian," I instructed. "I want to be on site when they arrive." By 1:30 p.m., we had transformed the carriage house behind my Victorian into a sophisticated surveillance command center. Multiple monitors displayed, feeds from cameras strategically placed throughout the main house, while a small team of technical specialists monitored recording equipment and maintained secure connections to Eleanor's chambers and Linda's office. "Audio calibration complete," reported Tessa, Michael's top surveillance expert. "We've got crystal clear pickup in every room, even with whispered conversations." I studied the property's thermal imaging display, which showed no heat signatures, inside the main house. "Entry points secured?" "All doors and windows are under monitoring," Michael confirmed. "They'll register any access attempt, but we've ensured nothing appears obviously secured. The house looks exactly as Daniel expects it to." At 1:45, the first alert sounded, a vehicle approaching the property. The black Escalade circled once before parking half a block away. Through high-powered lenses, we watched Jacob Stein, the cleaner, conduct a methodical perimeter check of my property, scanning for surveillance equipment with a handheld device that fortunately wasn't sophisticated enough to detect our military-grade systems. "He's good," Michael observed. "Ex-intelligence training is evident in his approach pattern." At 1:55, a second vehicle appeared, Daniel's Tesla, parking directly in front of the house with the confident entitlement of someone who believed he owned the property. Through our directional microphones, we captured his phone conversation as he exited the car. "I'm here now," Daniel said to someone. "Yes, everything's prepared." "No, she doesn't suspect anything. The Henderson estate access is still on schedule. I understand the timeline acceleration." "Yes, sir." Stein approached from his surveillance position, and the two men exchanged terse greetings before Daniel used a key he had no legitimate right to possess, to enter my home. "Recording all of this?" I confirmed with Linda, who represented our law enforcement component. "Every moment," she affirmed. "Unlawful entry established, conspiracy in progress." Inside my house, Daniel led Stein to my grandmother's study, the heart of the home where family documents had been kept for generations. "Primary target is here," Daniel explained, gesturing to the antique secretary desk. "We need all property, documentation removed and digital backups located. She maintains redundant systems." Stein surveyed the room with professional detachment. "Alarm systems? Hidden security?" "Disabled," Daniel replied with unearned confidence. "I've had access to the property for months. Security codes haven't changed since we started dating." What Daniel didn't know was that I'd maintained a completely separate security system he'd never discovered, one now feeding directly to our surveillance operation. "What about digital evidence?" Stein asked, unfolding specialized equipment from a compact case. Daniel moved to my grandmother's painting, a Monet-inspired garden scene that concealed a wall safe. "Primary target is behind here. Safe combination is 25 to 14 to 32. I watched, stomach tightening, as Daniel casually opened my family safe. Something I'd never shown him, never discussed. The violation felt intensely personal, beyond the legal implications. "How did he get the combination?" Linda whispered. "He must have watched me open it," I realized. "There's a reflection in the grandfather clock glass if you stand at the right angle." Inside the safe, Daniel removed the original deed to the Victorian, property surveys, and historical documentation establishing the home's provenance and value. "These are the originals," Daniel explained to Stein. "They need to disappear completely, and there should be digital backup drives as well." Stein methodically photographed each document before placing them in an evidence bag. "What about insurance? Documentation?" "Secondary target," Daniel replied, moving to my grandmother's desk, "along with historical appraisals and conservation easement paperwork." For the next 45 minutes, we documented as the two men systematically located and removed every piece of documentation connecting me to my family home. Original deeds, insurance policies, tax records, historical designations, and family. Photographs showing generations of Parkers in the Victorian. "This is beyond property theft," Linda murmured. "This is identity erasure." She was right. Daniel wasn't just stealing my house, he was attempting to eradicate my very connection to it, eliminating the evidence that bound my family history to the property. "What about her law office?" Stein asked as they finished with the home documentation. "That's phase 2, Daniel replied, checking his watch. "We have a narrow window tomorrow morning while she's in court. Reynolds is handling access." "Reynolds has been compromised," Stein stated, flatly. "My sources confirm he was escorted from Brennan and White yesterday." Daniel's expression darkened. "That's impossible. He would have warned me." "His credentials were revoked. Digital access terminated. Building privileges suspended," Stein continued, dispassionately. "We need alternate access to her professional documentation." Through the high-resolution camera, I could see the calculation in Daniel's eyes as he processed this setback. I can access her home computer tonight, he decided. She keeps client backup files there. Inefficient, Stein objected. Too many variables with her present. I'll handle it, Daniel insisted. I've been managing her for 3 years. One more. Night is nothing. The casual confidence with which he discussed managing me sent ice through my veins. 3 years of my life with a man who viewed our entire relationship as nothing more than an extended con operation. They're moving to the basement, Tessa reported as the thermal signatures shifted downward. In my home's cellar, Daniel showed Stein the wine cellar concealing a secondary storage area where family archives were kept. Historical photographs, journals, and memorabilia documenting the Parker family's connection to the house since 1892. All of this needs to go, Daniel instructed. Complete removal. When we're done, there should be no evidence the Parker family ever owned this property. Scorched earth approach, Stein noted. Expensive. Daniel's reply chilled me. Kazarian doesn't care about expense. He cares about clean assets with no complications. For nearly 2 hours, we documented as Daniel and Stein methodically violated my home, collecting and cataloging every document that established my ownership. Their thoroughness was both impressive and disturbing. They located hidden storage areas, identified concealed safes, and systematically removed generations of Parker family history. We're approaching decision point, Michael noted, checking his watch. Do we intervene now or allow them to leave with the documentation? Linda and I exchanged glances, silently calculating risk factors. If we stop them now, we catch them red-handed with my documents, I reasoned. But if we let them leave, we potentially trace them to other conspirators. Tracking devices are active on both vehicles, Tessa confirmed. We've also placed trackers within the document cases themselves. Let them complete their operation, I decided. We need to identify everyone involved, not just catch Daniel and his cleaner. We watched as the men finished their systematic purge of my home. What they didn't realize was that everything they collected had been meticulously documented beforehand, with certified copies securely stored with Judge Montgomery. Final sweep complete, Stein announced, closing his specialized equipment case. Property documentation has been secured, digital evidence located and removed. Daniel surveyed the study, satisfaction evident in his expression. Good. Phase 1 complete. Tomorrow we handle her office files, then accelerate the Kazarian timeline. Linda's eyebrows rose at this explicit mention, her hand already reaching for her secure phone to update federal authorities monitoring the Kazarian connection. What's our extraction plan? Stein asked. All business. You take the documentation to the processing location, Daniel instructed. I'll return to normal activities to maintain cover. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. sharp, we meet at her law office. Security access has been arranged through alternate channels. As they prepared to leave, Daniel paused at my grandmother's portrait, above the fireplace, casually removing it from the wall. Clients appreciate authentic period pieces, he remarked, wrapping the painting in a protective covering. This adds another $100,000 to the property package. The casual theft of my grandmother's portrait, painted by a renowned artist when she'd received her first judicial appointment, crystallized everything about Daniel's character. Not content with stealing my home and erasing my family's connection to it, he was now plundering personal treasures for additional profit. Once both men had left the property, our team shifted into high-precision tracking mode. Tessa monitored the GPS signals from both vehicles, while Michael coordinated with federal agents who had been strategically positioned around the city. Stein is heading north on Van Ness, Tessa reported. Daniel is returning downtown, likely to your condo. I checked my watch, nearly 5 p.m. I needed to maintain my cover for a few more hours, pretending I suspected nothing while our evidence collection operation reached its conclusion. Linda, you'll coordinate with the federal task force on Stein's destination, I instructed. Michael, maintain surveillance on Daniel. I need to return home and play my role one last time. Before departing, I walked through my violated home, cataloging what had been taken, what remained, what had been disturbed. In the study, empty spaces on walls marked where family photographs had hung for generations. The antique secretary desk stood open, drawers emptied of their contents. "We'll recover everything," Linda promised, seeing my expression. "It's not just about recovery," I replied quietly. "It's about justice, complete justice." On my secure drive, back to the condo, Eleanor called with an update. "Federal agents are monitoring Stein's movement to a warehouse in Oakland," she reported. "Treasury Department has authorized a surveillance operation based on the Kazarian connection. They'll maintain distance until we've gathered maximum evidence." "And Daniel's financial movements?" "Completely mapped," Eleanor confirmed. "The honeypot accounts show multiple access attempts in the past hour. He's trying to consolidate funds, likely preparing for rapid departure once the property transaction completes." I arrived at our condo at my usual time, mentally preparing for perhaps the most challenging performance of my life. Inside, Daniel had prepared an intimate dinner setting, candles, wine, music, all designed to manipulate and distract. "There's my beautiful fiancé," he greeted, kissing my cheek as if he hadn't spent the afternoon systematically erasing my family history. "I've been thinking about our conversation regarding a destination wedding. What about moving forward? Next week? I've made some calls. We could fly to Positano on Monday." His urgency was now transparent. He needed me out of the country while his cleaner completed the evidence removal and the property transfer finalized. "That sounds lovely," I replied, maintaining my role while the recording devices in my jewelry captured every word. "Though I'd need to address some client matters first. The Henderson closing." "Business will always be there," Daniel interrupted, smoothly. "Some things are more important. Us, for instance." He poured wine with practiced charm, his expression betraying nothing of his afternoon activities. Meanwhile, my phone silently vibrated with updates from our surveillance team. Stein arrived at Oakland warehouse. Federal agents confirming location, as document processing facility linked to 3 previous identity theft operations. Daniel's laptop accessed remotely. Downloading encrypted communications with Kazarian organization. Judge Montgomery has secured federal warrants for all identified conspirators. Enforcement coordinated for tomorrow morning. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Our evidence collection was nearly complete, warrants were being finalized, and enforcement teams were preparing for coordinated action. All I needed to do was maintain my cover for a few more hours, extracting final pieces of information while keeping Daniel's suspicions dormant. Over dinner, I carefully led the conversation toward his business trip, scheduled for the coming weekend. A trip I now knew was meant to finalize arrangements with Kazarian after my documentation was processed. "Tell me more about this Singapore conference," I prompted innocently. "Perhaps I could join you after our Positano visit." Daniel's momentary hesitation was nearly imperceptible before he smoothly fabricated details about a non-existent investment symposium. Each lie was another strand in the evidence web we were weaving around him. After dinner, Daniel suggested a nightcap on our terrace, his manner relaxed, yet watchful. I maintained my performance of unsuspecting fiancé while strategically extracting information about his upcoming movements. "I was thinking about the Henderson estate today," I mentioned casually, sipping the aged bourbon he'd poured. "Their historical documentation is fascinating. Property records dating back to the 1860s gold rush era." Daniel's interest sharpened, though he tried to appear merely curious. "Historical documents? Anything valuable?" "Primarily sentimental. Value," I replied with calculated nonchalance. "Though I suppose some collectors might find them interesting. They're secured in my office safe." His expression remained neutral, but I noted the slight adjustment in his posture, mentally adding, "This information to tomorrow's operation with Stein. I've been meaning to show you something," I continued, withdrawing an antique key from my pocket. "My grandmother's key to our family's lake house in Tahoe. I've been thinking we should visit there after the wedding. Daniel's eyes fixed on the key, a key to a property he clearly hadn't known existed. I didn't realize your family had a place in Tahoe. It's not something I talk about much, I explained. The property has been in a family trust for generations. Very private, very exclusive lakefront access. I watched him recalculate, mentally adjusting his assessment of my assets. The lake house was real, but its value was modest compared to the Victorian. Still, Daniel's reaction confirmed his fundamental motivation. He viewed me primarily as a collection of assets to be acquired. We should definitely visit, he agreed, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Perhaps even before the wedding? Throughout the evening, I carefully planted mentions of fictional documents, non-existent safety deposit boxes, and fabricated family heirlooms, creating a trail of misinformation that would keep Daniel and his associates chasing shadows even after our trap closed around them. My phone vibrated silently with updates from our surveillance operation, Stein still at Oakland facility. Multiple individuals identified entering, exiting. Facial recognition confirming connections to previous fraud cases. Remote access to Daniel's encrypted communications successful. Evidence of coordination with at least 3 other similar operations targeting professional women with significant property holdings. Daniel excused himself to make a quick business call, stepping inside while I remained on the terrace. Through our surveillance system, Michael confirmed he was contacting Kazarian, updating him on the document acquisition and adjusting tomorrow's timeline. When Daniel returned, he carried a small velvet box. I've been saving this for the right moment, he explained, presenting me with a diamond bracelet that perfectly matched my engagement ring. Consider it an early wedding gift. I allowed him to fasten it around my wrist, suppressing my revulsion at his touch. The bracelet was exquisite, and almost certainly purchased with proceeds from previous victims. I would later learn it had belonged to Rebecca Chambers, the Chicago executive, whose life Daniel had destroyed before targeting me. It's beautiful, I murmured, knowing the recording devices in my earrings captured the moment he placed stolen property on my wrist, another charge to add to his growing list of offenses. As midnight approached, Daniel grew increasingly affectionate, suggesting we turn in early with unmistakable implications. The thought of maintaining my charade through physical intimacy made my skin crawl, but I was saved by another urgent message on his phone. I need to handle this, he apologized, frowning at his screen. Market fluctuations in Asian trading. Give me 30 minutes? Take your time, I replied, suppressing my relief. I have some briefs to review anyway. When he retreated to his office, I messaged Michael. Status update? His response was immediate. All evidence secured. Federal agents maintaining surveillance. On Oakland facility. 8 individuals now identified in conspiracy. Judge Montgomery finalizing warrants for coordinated morning raids. Everything was proceeding according to plan. By tomorrow afternoon, Daniel's entire operation would be dismantled, his co-conspirators arrested, his assets frozen, and his freedom forfeit. In our bedroom, I prepared for sleep with mechanical precision, my mind cataloging final preparations. Though I maintained outward calm, inwardly I acknowledged the complex emotions swirling beneath my strategic focus. Grief for the relationship I'd believed was real, rage at the calculated betrayal, and cold determination to ensure justice was served completely. Daniel finally joined me after midnight, sliding into bed with practiced ease, his arm draping possessively across my waist. I regulated my breathing to feign sleep, while remaining acutely aware of his proximity. I love you, he whispered in the darkness, one final performance for the woman he believed remained fooled by his elaborate charade. Through narrowly opened eyes, I watched him check his phone one last time before setting it aside. The screen briefly illuminated his face, revealing an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, utterly devoid of the warmth he typically affected in my presence. This was Daniel's true face, the predator beneath the charming facade. In the stillness of our bedroom, surrounded by luxury items purchased with the proceeds of his previous victims, I mentally rehearsed tomorrow's sequence of events. Federal. Agents would arrest Stein and his associates at the Oakland facility at precisely 8 a.m. Simultaneously, Treasury Department officials would freeze all accounts connected to Kazarian's operation. Meanwhile, Daniel would be arrested while attempting to access my office files, caught in the act of perpetrating fraud against not just me but my clients. By mid-morning, his entire operation would collapse like a house of cards, each carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of irrefutable evidence. His criminal associates would race to save themselves by providing testimony against him. His stolen assets would be identified, cataloged, and restored to their rightful owners. And I would be there to witness it all, the architect of his complete and inescapable downfall. As Daniel's breathing deepened in sleep beside me, I allowed myself a moment of grim satisfaction. Tomorrow would be the final act in our 3-year performance, though only one of us knew the true ending that awaited. I woke before dawn, carefully extracting myself from Daniel's sleeping form. In the bathroom, I prepared for the day with meticulous attention, selecting a charcoal Armani suit that projected authority and composure. Today's outfit wasn't just professional attire, it was armor. Daniel stirred as I finished applying my makeup, watching me through half-lidded eyes. Early court appearance? The Henderson matter, I confirmed, securing my diamond earrings with their hidden recording technology. Judge Montgomery requested an 8 a.m. chambers conference. His expression flickered momentarily, Eleanor's involvement clearly unsettling him, before he manufactured a supportive smile. Need me to drive you? I could rearrange my morning calls. No, need, I replied, fastening my watch. Caroline's picking me up. We're having breakfast first. This fabrication served 2 purposes: preventing Daniel from accompanying me and establishing that someone expected my presence elsewhere, a standard safety protocol when dealing with potentially dangerous individuals. Daniel rose, moving to embrace me from behind, his reflection in the mirror the picture of devoted fiancé. Good luck today. I'm thinking Positano reservations for next Monday. I could make some calls this morning. I turned in his arms, studying his face one final time, the face that had convinced me of his sincerity for 3 years. That sounds perfect. As we parted in our foyer, Daniel kissed me with practiced tenderness. Love you. See you tonight for celebration dinner? I smiled with equal inauthenticity. Looking forward to it. The moment I entered the elevator, I activated secure communication protocols on my phone, messaging Michael, departing residence now. Target remains inside. Operation status? His response came immediately. All teams in position. Federal agents surrounding Oakland facility. Office security in place. Surveillance active on all subjects. In the parking garage, I bypassed my usual vehicle for the nondescript sedan Michael had arranged. Within minutes, I was en route to the command center established in a federal building downtown, where Eleanor, Linda, and key law enforcement officials awaited my arrival. Final briefing in progress. Eleanor greeted me, gesturing toward the central tactical display where multiple surveillance feeds showed our various targets. Daniel sent a coded confirmation to Stein 3 minutes ago. They're proceeding as planned. The operations room hummed with controlled activity as federal agents, cybersecurity specialists, and financial crimes investigators coordinated their respective responsibilities. On the main screen, Daniel appeared in our condo, dressing hurriedly, after receiving an encrypted message from Stein. They believe they have a 90-minute window while you're in court, Michael explained, joining us at the command table. Facial recognition has identified 3 additional associates arriving at the Oakland facility. Treasury Department confirms 2 have direct ties to Kazarian's organization. I studied the tactical display showing real-time positions of all surveillance teams and law enforcement units. Timeline confirmation? Daniel will leave for your office in approximately 20 minutes, Michael replied. Stein is dispatching 2 associates to meet him there. Meanwhile, primary document processing continues at the Oakland warehouse. Linda approached with an update from the Treasury Department. Kazarian himself has arrived in San Francisco, landed at a private airfield 30 minutes ago. Currently en route to the Fairmont Hotel for what they believe is the final transaction approval. This development exceeded our expectations. Having Kazarian personally present would elevate the case from fraud and money laundering to potential RICO charges, transforming a serious case into a major federal prosecution. Adjust the operation parameters, I instructed. We need surveillance coverage at the Fairmont immediately. Eleanor nodded to a federal agent who immediately began coordinating additional resources. Treasury Department is dispatching a specialized team. This significantly expands our operation scope. For the next 15 minutes, I reviewed final preparations with each team leader, ensuring every aspect of our complex countermove was synchronized. On surveillance monitors, we watched Daniel leave our building, enter his Tesla, and begin driving toward my office building. All units confirm ready status, announced the FBI tactical commander. Authorization to proceed awaits your signal. Judge Montgomery. Eleanor looked to me, a silent acknowledgement that while this was officially a federal operation, the decision to proceed remained mine. This was personal justice as much as legal remedy. I took a deep breath, thinking of Rebecca, Chambers, and Ellen Whitaker, the previous victims who had lost everything to Daniel's predatory scheme. Thinking of my grandmother's portrait, casually stolen as a profitable afterthought. Thinking of 3 years spent with a man who had viewed our entire relationship as nothing more than an elaborate con. Proceed, I authorized, my voice steady. Throughout the operations center, a coordinated cascade of activity commenced. On multiple screens, we watched as federal agents simultaneously converged on the Oakland warehouse, Daniel's position near my office, and the Fairmont Hotel where Kazarian had just checked in. Target 1 entering your office building, reported the surveillance coordinator. Accompanied by 2 unidentified males matching Stein associate profiles. Oakland team in position, came another update. Warehouse perimeter secured. Fairmont. Team reports visual confirmation of Kazarian in presidential suite. 2 known associates present. The operation unfolded with military precision. At precisely 8:17 a.m., federal agents executed coordinated raids at all 3 locations simultaneously. Through live feeds, we watched as Daniel was apprehended in the act of attempting to access my office with falsified credentials. His expression of shock when confronted by armed federal agents was captured in high definition, the moment he realized his carefully constructed world was imploding. All primary targets in custody, confirmed the tactical commander 7 minutes later. No casualties, no collateral damage. Evidence recovery proceeding at all locations. Linda turned to me, professional satisfaction evident in her expression. Preliminary inventory from the Oakland facility confirms recovery of all documentation removed from your Victorian yesterday. Additionally, they've located files appearing to belong to at least 7 other victims. I nodded, emotions carefully controlled as I watched the simultaneous operations conclude successfully on the tactical displays. Daniel's 3-year scheme had been dismantled in less than 20 minutes of coordinated law enforcement action. What happens now? I asked Eleanor, watching as Daniel was escorted to a federal vehicle, his hands cuffed behind his back. Now, she replied with grim satisfaction. We build the most comprehensive fraud, identity theft, and money laundering case this jurisdiction has ever seen. The federal building's interview observation room offered perfect sightlines to Daniel's interrogation through one-way glass. For nearly 3 hours, I watched as he transitioned through textbook stages of denial, anger, bargaining, and finally, calculating cooperation. He's attempting to minimize, noted Special Agent Rivera, the lead investigator assigned to Daniel's case, claiming he was merely an unwitting participant in Kazarian's operation. I studied Daniel's body language as he spoke with federal prosecutors, the subtle tells I'd learned to recognize during our relationship now glaringly obvious. The slight adjustment of his cuffs when fabricating details. The momentary eye shift when constructing timelines. The practiced sincerity I'd once mistaken for genuine emotion. He's building a narrative where he's another victim, I observed. Classic manipulation strategy. Rivera nodded appreciatively at my assessment. Unfortunately for Mr. Mercer, we've already interviewed Stein. Their stories have critical contradictions. At noon, Eleanor joined us with updates from the parallel operations. Kazarian is maintaining silence, but his associates are competing to offer testimony. Treasury has frozen over $140 million in connected assets across 12 jurisdictions. And the Oakland facility? I asked. Evidence processing continues, but preliminary findings exceed expectations. They've identified documentation from 9 separate fraud operations targeting professional women across 3 states. The pattern is consistent. Professional women with significant property holdings, minimal family connections, high-value client portfolios. My phone vibrated with a message from Michael. Victorian documentation fully recovered. Grandmother's portrait located in Stein's vehicle. All items being processed as evidence but can be returned within 72 hours. Relief washed through me, tempered by the knowledge that while my property would be restored, the violation of my home and trust couldn't be so easily remedied. We've connected Reynolds to 3 other paralegals at different firms, Rivera continued, updating the evidence board. They've been facilitating similar documentation fraud for at least 5 years. Linda entered with a thick binder of financial records. Treasury Department completed preliminary analysis of the money trails. Daniel personally received approximately $4.2 million from previous operations. Most was laundered through shell companies before being reinvested in legitimate businesses, including the investment firm where he claimed to work, I noted, the final piece clicking into place. His entire professional identity was constructed using proceeds from previous victims. In the interrogation room, Daniel's demeanor had shifted to pragmatic cooperation as federal prosecutors outlined the evidence against him. The man who had charmed me for 3 years was methodically bartering information in exchange for consideration, offering details about Kazarian's organization, identifying co-conspirators, detailing operational methods. Classic narcissistic. Response, observed Dr. Harris, the FBI psychological consultant. No genuine remorse, just strategic adaptation to maximize personal advantage. By mid-afternoon, the evidence recovery teams had photographed, cataloged, and secured all documentation taken from my Victorian. Additionally, they had identified financial records connecting Daniel to his previous victims, Rebecca Chambers and Ellen Whitaker, along with evidence suggesting at least 4 other women had been targeted, but escaped before operations completed. We've located Rebecca Chambers, Linda reported, referring to Daniel's Chicago victim. Treasury Department is preparing to unfreeze assets they've identified as rightfully hers. She's being contacted about providing testimony. The implications extended beyond just criminal charges. With federal authorities involved in connection to international money laundering established, civil asset recovery became significantly more feasible. Women who had previously lost everything might actually recover substantial portions of their stolen property. At 3 o'clock, I met briefly with Daniel's defense attorney, a federal public defender assigned temporarily until private counsel could be arranged. The contrast between this harried public servant and the high-powered legal representation Daniel had always bragged about accessing was stark illustration of how completely his facade had collapsed. My client is interested in discussing cooperation. Parameters, the attorney began awkwardly. That would be between your client and federal prosecutors, I replied coolly. I'm here strictly as a victim providing evidence. He specifically requested to speak with you, the attorney continued. He believes there are personal matters that might facilitate resolution. Eleanor, who had accompanied me as both federal judge and personal support, interjected firmly. Any communication with Ms. Parker will occur only through formal channels with full recording and appropriate protections in place. Your client's history of manipulation and psychological coercion makes informal contact inappropriate. By late afternoon, federal prosecutors had outlined preliminary charges against Daniel: wire fraud, identity theft, money laundering, conspiracy, and racketeering. The combined charges carried potential sentences exceeding 30 years. With Kazarian's organization now implicated, additional charges related to international financial crimes remained pending. They've offered him a cooperation deal, Rivera informed me. 20 years with possibility of reduction to 15 in exchange for complete testimony against Kazarian and all associates. His response? I asked. Initial rejection. He still believes he can negotiate better terms. Rivera's expression held professional detachment tinged with satisfaction. He doesn't yet understand the comprehensive nature of our evidence, typical of individuals accustomed to manipulating systems. As evening approached, I returned to my Victorian, accompanied by Michael and a security team. The house had been processed as a crime scene, with evidence technicians having documented every aspect of Daniel and Stein's activities. Yellow evidence markers still dotted locations where they had removed or tampered with documentation. I moved through rooms that had been in my family for generations, cataloging violated spaces, disturbed belongings, compromised sanctuaries. In my grandmother's study, I paused before the empty space where her portrait had hung. A visceral reminder of how thoroughly Daniel had betrayed every aspect of trust. The portrait will be returned tomorrow, Michael assured me. All your documentation is secure. The house remains legally yours. It never actually transferred. I nodded, appreciating his attempt at comfort while knowing that legal restoration couldn't address the deeper violation. Daniel hadn't just attempted to steal my property. He had systematically exploited my trust, manipulated my affection, and weaponized intimacy for financial gain. Security systems have been upgraded, Michael continued practically. Complete surveillance coverage, enhanced access protocols, direct connection to federal monitoring. Practical measures for moving forward, necessary steps toward reclaiming my space and security. Yet standing in my grandmother's violated study, I acknowledged the parallel process required, rebuilding internal security that had been just as systematically compromised as my home. 1 week after Daniel's arrest, I sat in Eleanor's chambers reviewing the expanding case against him. What had begun as property fraud investigation had evolved into one of the largest financial crimes prosecutions in the district's history. Treasury Department has identified over $200 million in connected assets, Eleanor explained, reviewing the latest federal findings. Kazarian's operation extended well beyond real estate fraud into securities manipulation, tax evasion, and international money laundering. And Daniel's role? I asked, examining the organizational chart prosecutors had assembled. More significant than initially understood. Financial forensics indicate he wasn't merely Kazarian's operative. He helped design the targeting methodology. Eleanor's expression hardened. They developed algorithms to identify potential victims based on specific vulnerability factors. The clinical description couldn't mask the predatory reality. Daniel had systematically hunted successful professional women, analyzing their financial positions, personal circumstances, and psychological profiles to optimize exploitation potential. What? About his previous victims? I asked. Rebecca Chambers arrives tomorrow to provide formal testimony. Treasury has confirmed recovery potential for approximately 60% of her assets. Eleanor shuffled through the case files. Ellen Whitaker's situation is more complex. Many assets were liquidated and moved through multiple jurisdictions. However, Federal seizures from Kazarian's accounts may provide restitution options. 3 previously unknown victims had also been identified, women whose cases hadn't progressed as far as Rebecca's or mine, but who had experienced early stages of Daniel's methodology. They've each confirmed identical relationship patterns, Linda noted, joining us with updated prosecution materials. Initial meeting at professional events, whirlwind romance, strategic privacy about his finances combined with careful study of theirs. The systematic nature of Daniel's operations somehow made the betrayal simultaneously more and less personal. I hadn't been specifically targeted because of who I was, but rather what I owned and represented. The violation remained intimate, while the motivation was clinically mercenary. At noon, Michael arrived with updates from the federal task force continuing to process evidence from the Oakland facility. They've located documentation connected to planned future targets, he reported grimly. Preliminary profiles on at least 15 women across the country, all successful professionals with significant property holdings. Did I know any of them? I asked, wondering how far Daniel's networking at social events had extended beyond simple charm. Michael hesitated before sliding a folder across the table. 3 were guests at your holiday party last December. Daniel apparently used social gatherings to conduct initial assessments. The realization that he had been prospecting for future victims in my home, among my friends and colleagues, sent a fresh wave of revulsion through me. His betrayal extended beyond our relationship to weaponize my entire social network. Have they been notified? Eleanor asked. Treasury Department is handling notifications through financial security advisors, Michael confirmed. Discreet approach to minimize personal distress while ensuring their assets are secured. By mid-afternoon, I visited Margaret Brennan to review findings from their internal investigation into Timothy Reynolds and Bradley Wilson. The prestigious firm's marble conference room felt appropriate for the gravity of their conclusions. Wilson has been terminated and reported to the Bar Association, Margaret informed me, sliding formal documentation across the polished table. Our forensic audit identified 17 instances where he facilitated improper documentation through Reynolds. The firm has established a victim compensation fund for affected clients. And the other paralegals connected to Reynolds? I asked. 2 have been terminated from their respective firms. The third is cooperating with federal investigators. Margaret's expression reflected professional determination to address systemic vulnerabilities. We're implementing new authentication protocols across all property transactions and establishing an ethics review committee with independent oversight. The institutional response was encouraging, not merely addressing individual bad actors but recognizing and remedying the systemic weaknesses that had enabled their operations. From Brennan and White, I proceeded to the Henderson estate closing, the legitimate business that had continued despite personal upheaval. The elderly client greeted me with unexpected warmth. Judge Montgomery told me what happened, Mrs. Henderson confided, patting my hand. My herald always said you reminded him of your grandmother. Same steel beneath the graciousness. The closing proceeded efficiently, the $22 million transaction executing flawlessly despite Daniel's attempts to compromise it. As I completed the final documentation, I reflected on the professional integrity that had remained unshaken despite personal betrayal. By evening, I returned to my Victorian for the first time since security upgrades had been completed. The house felt different, not just because of new security systems or the lingering awareness of violation, but because I viewed it through transformed perspective. In my grandmother's study, her portrait had been restored to its proper place. The antique secretary repaired where Daniel had damaged the locking mechanism. Family photographs once again lined the walls, documenting generations of Parkers who had preserved this legacy. Michael arrived as I was reviewing restoration work in the wine cellar, bringing updates on Daniel's legal proceedings. He's accepted the plea agreement, Michael reported. 20 years with possibility of reduction to 15 based on cooperation value. Asset forfeiture including all personal accounts, investment holdings, and property acquired through criminal proceeds. Which means everything, I noted, since his entire financial existence was built on fraud. Complete financial dissolution, Michael confirmed. The Tesla, designer wardrobe, even the watch collection he was so proud of. All purchased with proceeds from previous victims. All subject to forfeiture. There was justice in this comprehensive dismantling. The man who had systematically stolen from others now stripped of everything he had accumulated. The architect of financial destruction facing total asset forfeiture himself. He's requested another meeting with you, Michael added carefully. Through his attorney this time, following proper protocols. I considered this information, weighing potential value against psychological cost. Did he indicate purpose? Claims to have information about additional documentation you might want recovered. Michael's skepticism was evident. Could be manipulation attempt, could be legitimate. I moved to the bay window overlooking the garden my grandmother had designed, considering options with clear-eyed assessment rather than emotional reaction. Schedule it, I decided. Full security protocols, recorded, with Eleanor present. Let's hear what he has to say. The Federal Detention Center's meeting room was deliberately institutional. Bare walls, utilitarian furniture, constant surveillance. Daniel sat across the table, his designer suit replaced by standard-issue jumpsuit, his manicured appearance already showing signs of institutional deterioration after just 2 weeks in custody. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice maintaining that practiced charm that once seemed so genuine. "I know you have every reason to refuse." I studied him with clinical detachment, noting the calculated body language, the carefully vulnerable expression, the subtle manipulation techniques that had once seemed like authentic connection. "I'm here because you claim to have information about additional documentation," I replied evenly. "Federal prosecutors are interested in any outstanding evidence." Beside me, Eleanor maintained professional composure, while a court reporter documented every word. 2 federal agents stood at the door, a visible reminder that this encounter occurred entirely on my terms. Daniel leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "What they've recovered isn't everything, Eliza. There are other documents, personal items, that weren't processed through Oakland." "Such as?" I prompted, refusing to engage in his attempt at creating artificial intimacy. "Your grandmother's journals, the original deed from 1892, family correspondence from the 1906 earthquake." He paused, gauging my reaction. "Things with sentimental value beyond their financial worth." My expression remained neutral, though inwardly I acknowledged the painful accuracy of his assessment. These were precisely the items whose loss would distress me most. The irreplaceable documentation of family history that transcended mere property value. "Where are these items?" Eleanor interjected, maintaining procedural focus. Daniel's eyes remained on me. "I have a safety deposit box, contents accessible only with biometric verification and passcode. I'm prepared to provide access, with certain considerations." "You're not in position to negotiate," I reminded him calmly. "Federal asset forfeiture has already been authorized. Any undisclosed holdings constitute additional violations." "This isn't about money," Daniel insisted. "The contents have no financial value to anyone but you. I'm offering to ensure their return." "In exchange for what?" Eleanor asked directly. Daniel hesitated, weighing his response. "Recommendation of leniency during sentencing, and..." He paused, manufacturing sincerity with practiced precision. "A chance to explain myself." I studied the man I'd once agreed to marry, seeing clearly the calculated performance behind every gesture, every expression, every word. 3 years of my life spent with someone who had viewed our entire relationship as an elaborate con, who, had weaponized intimacy as methodology for theft. The safety deposit information can be provided to federal investigators, I replied evenly. Any legitimate personal items will be processed through proper evidence channels and returned if appropriate. And my explanation? Daniel pressed, leaning forward. Don't you want to know why? Don't you have questions about us? About what was real? The trap was elegant in its simplicity, appealing to natural curiosity, to the human desire for closure, to the need to make sense of betrayal. Classic manipulation leveraging emotional vulnerability as access point. There is no us to discuss, I stated, my tone matter of fact rather than bitter. Any questions I had were answered through your actions, your communications with co-conspirators, and the documented pattern established with previous victims. Something flickered in Daniel's expression, frustration at the failed manipulation attempt, recalculation of approach. He shifted strategies with practiced fluidity. I did care for you, Eliza, more than the others. That's why I hesitated, why the timeline extended longer than planned. Ask the federal investigators. They've seen the communications where Kazarian pressured me to complete the operation months ago. Operational delay doesn't indicate genuine emotion, I observed clinically. It simply reflects risk assessment and tactical adjustment based on circumstances. Daniel's mask slipped momentarily, revealing flashes of the calculation beneath his performative vulnerability. He quickly reconstructed his expression, but the glimpse confirmed what I already knew. Everything remained tactical, even now. The wall? Safety deposit details, Eleanor prompted, redirecting the conversation to its legitimate purpose. For several minutes, Daniel provided specific information about the concealed holdings, location, access protocols, inventory contents. The federal agents documented everything while maintaining professional detachment. As the meeting concluded, Daniel made one final attempt at establishing emotional connection. When this is over, years from now, I hope you'll be open to hearing the full story. There were genuine moments, Eliza. Not everything was calculated. I stood, gathering my materials without responding to his manufactured sentimentality. His need to believe some aspect of his deception transcended pure predation was ultimately irrelevant to me. The U.S. Attorney has been notified about this previously undisclosed asset, Eleanor informed him. This meeting will be factored into their evaluation of your cooperation agreement. Outside the detention center, late afternoon sunlight bathed the city in golden hues. I paused on the steps, breathing deeply as I formally concluded this chapter of engagement with the man who had attempted to steal not just my property, but years of my life. You handled that perfectly, Eleanor observed, her tone reflecting both professional approval and personal pride. Complete composure, no emotional engagement, perfect strategic balance. 3 days later, federal agents recovered the contents of Daniel's hidden safety deposit box, precisely as described, containing family documentation dating back generations. The materials joined the growing evidence collection while being processed for eventual return. I spent the following weekend at my Victorian, systematically reclaiming spaces that had been violated. In my grandmother's study, I restored family photographs to their proper places, rearranged furniture to configurations that felt right rather than staged for Daniel's approval, and began the process of establishing new security, both physical and emotional. 1 month after Daniel's arrest, I hosted a gathering for those who had supported me throughout the ordeal: Eleanor, Michael, Linda, Margaret Brennan, and other allies who had helped dismantle Daniel's operation. We convened not in my formal dining room, but in the kitchen that had always been the heart of the Parker family home. The federal prosecutor called today, Eleanor announced as we shared dinner, based on evidence provided by Daniel and corroborated. Through independent sources, they've identified 3 additional operations targeting professional women across the country. Federal coordination has already prevented 2 potential victims from loss. This represented the most meaningful outcome. Not just justice for past victims, but prevention of future harm. The system Daniel had helped design was now being used to dismantle similar operations and protect potential targets. To reclamation, Margaret offered, raising her glass in toast. Of property, of trust, of justice. As crystal glasses clinked in unified purpose, I surveyed these powerful, principled professionals gathered in my reclaimed home. Daniel had targeted me for perceived vulnerability as a successful woman with significant assets. Instead, he had unwittingly selected an adversary uniquely positioned to dismantle not just his operation, but the entire criminal enterprise behind it.